Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to UAP Studies Podcast. My name is Jason. We are back in full swing with new episodes coming out every Monday. At least we're aiming to have them out every Monday. There has been a few hiccups recently with some guests, some scheduling, and things we promised didn't come through, and we apologize for that. That's my bad. Nothing to do with the co-host. That's all me. I'm going to welcome Dr. Michael Glosson to the podcast. How you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm doing great. I'm feeling good. How are you guys?
Uh, I'm feeling good. How are you, Katie?
I'm doing wonderful.
Katie's got a new background as well. She's got new LED lights in the bookcases, and I'm jealous because it really does enhance the bookcases. So
I mean, it does. Look at this clicker. It does everything you can think of.
Clicker.
So I'm excited to play with that.
it's going to be a competition where we're all working on the background, like who has the best background. Might actually help the podcast. Actually, that might not be a bad thing.
Keep up with Katie.
Yeah. So I want to welcome Thomas Jane back on UAP Studies Podcast. How are you doing today, Thomas?
Well, I'm fighting a cold, but I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be able to present this talk to you guys. That some of you, Jason, have heard this before at Contact, and I'm a little surprised you want to hear it again. But I'm honored. I'm honored to be invited to present my case here.
It seriously, and I wasn't joking, because I told that to everybody after your presentation. I'm like, did you see his presentation? Some people are like, no. I'm like, dude, you missed the best presentation. And I'm not saying like, Katie, I know you did a bunch of presentation. I'm just saying, the way that you delivered it and stuff like that. And I was, like I mentioned on the flight home, I was like, what was it like? To me, it was very memorable. But you brought up a bunch of cases, one that I wasn't really familiar with.
Good.
You brought up a bunch of good points, philosophical aspects. Like you crammed so much in what you had, maybe an hour and a half at most to do your presentation. But dude, and then by the end, I don't know if anybody else stood up, but I just stood up and like I was impressed. That was solid.
That was really rewarding when people stood up. You were first. You stood up, and then other people joined you, and it was a great experience for me because it's my first time.
Yeah,
standing up in front of folks, trying to deliver a presentation. So
I think I texted you afterwards that you should quit acting and do this full time instead. It was that good.
I really enjoy it. I gotta tell you, it's so much fun. It's such a dense subject, and there's so much to cover. But this kind of thing kind of forces you to boil it down and be specific. This version is going to be a little bit different. I've got a little bit more time to fill out some arguments, and I've thrown in a few extra treats just for you.
And just before we get into it, the writing process for this is, it's got to be based off your book, but what's your writing process on this? And when you do your research, exactly, like, could you describe to us how that looks like?
Well, the research, at least in the beginning, was kind of, following my nose and whatever was most interesting to me. And at some point I had to start taking notes in order to be able to keep the concepts alive instead of running back to reference a book that I just read 2 weeks ago. Started making notes, and then those notes grew and grew. And then in the process of recording interesting ideas, they started to connect in different ways. And then that becomes, a new idea at some point. You're like, I guess the process is putting pieces together until a picture starts to emerge. It seems interesting.
The interesting stuff is really in the connections between ideas, not in the single ideas themselves.
Yeah, exactly. You're a philosophy guy. That's exactly how it's done, right?
Well, so I had a question about so this was your first big presentation that you ever gave, and I sort of wondered about like the sort of nervousness element of it. Like I spent a pretty long time working as a musician, and there's like a sort of anxiety you feel going on stage and playing for a bunch of people, and eventually that goes away. And then when I started
after enough Jack and Coke.
Yeah, right. That does help. But then when I started teaching, you can't use the Jack and Coke.
Right.
Get in front of a group of people, and I would feel a new kind of nervousness, even though it's a much smaller crowd. Like playing in front of 1,000 people, not a big deal. But talking in front of 50 people became immediately nerve-wracking, and then I kind of got over that. I wondered if
Right.
you feel the same thing, like getting in front of people and talking about this. Is that totally different than
And no,
acting?
it's the same. It's absolutely nerve-wracking. And the good news is once you get into the flow, and the ideas themselves start to take over, it becomes a lot easier. But I'm a naturally introverted type of person. You know, there's two kinds of people. There's extroverts and who want all the attention, and there's introverts who want to hide, and they feel this need to sort of expose themselves because they spend their life hiding. I'm the second category, so it's never easy for me to get up in front of people, but you know, I've done it a few times, so I kind of know the drill.
And Katie, do you have any Katie, do you have any questions for Thomas before we get started?
Well, I'm anxious to get started. Unfortunately, I miss seeing it at Contact in the Desert. So I'm so excited for this opportunity to see this because it was all the buzz. So, and awesome for you, Jason, getting the standing nose started. That's great. So,
You know, I didn't know that because I was up front, so I didn't know that I started. It's like when the first guys that starts to wave at the hockey game, you feel really proud when it catches on, right?
What a Canadian hockey.
Yeah, I'm Canadian. Yeah, exactly. Everything's hockey and beer as far as I'm concerned. So again, guys, probably best if you are listening to the podcast to view this. Spotify has a video option, and we are on YouTube. So that would be the best place to listen to this because you'll actually see the visual and the slides that Thomas has in his presentation. And we are doing more presentations like this. This is part 1 with Thomas. We'll do another part 2 after this. And we got a few other people coming up doing presentations. So it's actually quite different in the podcasting realm. This is not usually done. So it's quite cool. And Thomas is kicking us off with these things. So
and one difference is that we're not going to be jumping in for discussion. We're going to let the presentation run. And then sort of at the end, we're going to have like the Q&A section. So we're audience for this. Thomas is going to take it away. And that's how it'll run in future presentations that we do with other people too.
That's right. And thank you. So this should take about an hour. I've broken this up into 2 pieces, like you said, mostly because I'm not feeling very well today. So I need my nap later. So sit back, relax, enjoy the visuals I put together, and welcome to my updated, fresh out of the box, brand spanking new presentation that I call When Worlds Collide. Okay, let's get into it. So today in the modern era, we are experiencing an enormous amount of UFO activity here in the West and around the world. Richard Dolan and other fine researchers believe that this recent uptick is no accident. He says the phenomenon is intimately related to the accelerating pace of human technology and our, quote, progress as a species. And there's no doubt that UFO activity is directly correlated to the modern age of science. The quality and the quantity of sightings have increased dramatically since World War II. So now, a correlation is not causation, we know this, but I will argue that the rate of technological change in our society is, let's see, this fucking thing. Let's see. That's much better. Now, correlation, right? So I'm going to argue that the rate of technological change in our society is perfectly predictable, with a straight line from the discovery of fire to the discovery of language. And I say discovery and not invention, to the discovery of the printing press, to the discovery of science, the electromagnetic spectrum, to the atom entropy, to the steam engine, relativity, to quantum entanglement, to the transistor, the personal computer, the internet, cell phones, social media, computed tomography, scanning, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, psi phenomenon, life extension, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, anti-gravity, and boom, interstellar travel. Now, this technical evolution, as I stated, should be entirely predictable to any aliens out there aware of us as a species. So at this moment, we are as a wise man said, prehistoric biology, living within medieval systems and using futuristic technology. We have had the same essential hardware for the last 350,000 years, at least. Our social systems, our church and state, our schooling, slave wages, marriage, these have all been operating since at least before the time of Christ. And we are one scientific revolution away from a new paradigm that will allow us to export these brains and these systems and this technology to the entire cosmos. But this is not, in the words of Richard Dolan again, a normal progression here. We are now entering a fundamentally different reality. Digital surveillance, digital ID, digital currency, digital food. If that sounds crazy, look it up. And at the same time, and for the last 80 years, and here's the punchline, aliens, non-human intelligence, has begun an irreversible process of inserting themselves into the social, the scientific, and the technological timelines of human history. We are being altered, impacted, influenced by an extraterrestrial intelligence. It's a fact. Now, what prevents us from truly accepting this reality is nothing but propaganda, otherwise known as human civilization. No matter what you believe in, Buddhism, Hinduism, atheism, scientism, physicalism, materialism, idealism, any and all isms are all one thing, thought prisons. And all of these constructs distort our reality. It's human nature. A little light shines through the bars of each and every one of these little thought prisons, but each one constrains that light and distorts it until all we see are shadows on the wall. So how's that working out for us? The pace of change in the modern era is unprecedented. It took 200,000 years for the human population to reach 1 billion people. It took 200 years for the world to reach its current population of 8 billion. That's 1/1000th of the time. While our population was increasing by a factor of 7, energy consumption grew by a factor of 25, and consumption ballooned 100-fold. This recent spate of exponential growth in population, and energy, and consumption, well, it represents the single most anomalous period in all of human history. So as Dane Wigington, I'm a fan of Dane, in his Geoengineering Watch weekly bad news broadcast says, quote, Homo sapiens are currently approaching the peak of the plague phase in a one-off global population cycle and will crash because of depleted resources, habitat deterioration, and psychosocial feedback, including the coming probable nuclear wars over remaining resources. Mad Max on a global scale is already unfolding, but only in facing the oncoming storm do we stand any chance of anyone making it through what is coming. End quote. Wigington says, if there is any intelligent life in the universe, and if they are watching this self-annihilating behavior of the human race and the controller's scripted political circus of the absurd constantly streaming on Matrix media, would they not likely conclude that the human race is definitely doomed? I'm sure you've noticed Western governments are now behaving suspiciously like autocratic totalitarian systems. It's everything everywhere all at once because it's the end of the world, folks. In the movies, we call it stakes. What are the stakes for the characters? A genetically engineered shark doesn't just threaten to eat the whole cast. If it escapes into the wild, it's going to breed and eat everything in the ocean. Stakes at hand here are the end of the world, as we know it. And it's not coming back. The only question is, what kind of world will we end up with? Now, the people who control these power structures aren't going to tell us this, but they have seen the future, and they are taking drastic action now to ensure that when the dust settles, they'll still be in power. That's it. That's the whole game, folks. Let the bodies lay where they land. On the other side, we've got another cataclysmic collision coming our way. Our civilization is waking up to the reality that, sorry, well, you know what? Screw it. On the other side, our civilization is waking up to another reality, which exists at the liminal spaces, at the edges of our perception. That's the intersection of humanity and visiting aliens. So in 1960, the famous report from the venerable think tank, the Brookings Institute, stated that the chances were high that disclosure of alien visitation would destabilize society. They weren't talking about you and me. They were talking about the power structures that control you and me. UFOs and the non-human intelligence they represent are direct threats to these power structures. And that's one of the reasons why taking them seriously now is paramount to the integrity of our society. This is why the work that you guys are doing here and many other places around the interwebs is important, because this is not Sunday night football. This game is going to change the world permanently. Independent research, that's always been the hallmark of ufology. Just like independent journalists and podcasters are saving the free world right now, we need independent scientists and academics to get involved, take that sabbatical, get in on the ground floor. There's still room in the elevator. We need you. If we can combat fear with facts, we might have a chance. And there's no doubt this is not an easy subject. Humans are the apex intelligence on this planet, but we do not and we cannot have the capacity to study creatures who are more advanced than us, older than us, have better technology than we do, have access to better and more intellectual resources than we do, if they don't want to be studied. For how, I ask, do you study something that has the ability to evade our scientific methodology, which requires clear, measurable, repeatable observations over time? This means everything we know about aliens exists because the aliens themselves allow us to have that knowledge. Nothing we know about UFOs is by chance. Nothing is by circumstance. And yes, this includes things like crash retrievals. Now, the UFO phenomenon has been historically viewed with ridicule, with laughter, with disdain. So if you're taking even a passing interest in the question of the UFO, you are exercising your God-given right to question reality. Every major discovery that has ever moved human science and technology forward begins with a question. What's the nature of this phenomenon? What is reality? So scientific inquiry insists that the groundwork of human understanding must be found where? Within experience, within our actual encounters with the natural world. And this means that the primary bearer of true epistemological weight falls upon the human senses. David Hume, he stated that all knowledge that we have of the external world must be derived from sensory experience. Hume exemplifies a natural scientific skepticism. Just because the sun came up yesterday, one should not infer that it's going to rise tomorrow, says Hume. We should not rely on anything outside the bounds of observation. Immanuel Kant would later argue that the human mind never truly encounters the world as such, but only representations of that world, which are conditioned by the human mind itself, right? So all we experience is representational of reality, never reality itself. So on what basis can we trust the reliability of the human mind? Is our experience reflective of reality, or is it a stubbornly persistent illusion? To make sense of our senses, we have to assume a certain uniformity to nature. But the only basis we have for verifying this uniformity must come from the senses. So this is the French philosopher Henry Bergson, and he provides us with a way out of this conundrum. He says that the properties of consciousness should not be limited to human intelligence. we should ask what nature itself must be like in order for human consciousness to be what it is. In other words, what is the nature of nature? That human consciousness would be a fundamental expression of it. So I think we can apply Bergson's mode of thinking to alien intelligence. What is the nature of our reality, where alien visitation could be a fundamental expression of it? I believe studying the relationship between humanity and visiting aliens is integral to the future of the human species. I've assigned myself to studying the subject for the last 15 years. That led to writing a book. I call it AI, Artificial Idiocy. I wrote a book. It's called A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens. I'm editing it now. And you may have noticed I'm using the term UFO, not UAP. Call them whatever you like. UFO, UAP, you do you. I will continue to use the original moniker. Why? In order to preserve the legacy of those who founded the field. So out there, they can argue whether UAP or Russian, Chinese, or NHI. Those are congressional terms of reference now, and that is good work. It needs to be done. But I believe that we know what these things are, thanks to the good work of the researchers who came before us. So perhaps the greatest mystery in modern history is that of alien visitation. The second greatest mystery is why we're ignoring the greatest mystery. Alexander Wendt and Raymond Duval wrote a really neat paper. I highly recommend reading it. And they call it a UFO taboo, a tacit proclamation against the study of UFOs in both science and government. So the practice of science, what we're so good at, has not yet been applied when it comes to UFOs and alien intelligence. And the problem is not evidence. The problem is the absolute dearth of scientists who are not afraid to look at the evidence honestly and scrutinize the details. But this is not a scientific problem. This is a cultural problem. Like so many other things, the culture of science is broken. We're living in a world where everything is being captured, right? Politics, media, science, medicine. This is a fact. Peer review today, unfortunately, is broken. We can thank Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, for that. And we'll get into that after. But peer review has been perverted by corporate capture. Nature magazine, 10,000 scientific papers were retracted in 2023. The vast majority not for faulty data, but for sham papers and peer review fraud. A few years ago, Dr. Marcia Angel, longtime editor-in-chief of the New England Medical Journal, shared her view. She says, quote, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published." Dr. Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of The Lancet, he concurs, "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue." This doesn't mean good science can't be done. It means that good science is impeded by the culture that scientists have been forced to work in. Carl Sagan. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is hogwash. Nowhere in science is there a special extraordinary drawer where we pull evidence from. Evidence is evidence. The qualifier extraordinary is meaningless because it begs the question, extraordinary according to what? Richard Thiem, a very good researcher, he says the moniker extraordinary is contextual, whether somebody does or does not find it likely for a phenomenon to exist within an established framework. Many world-shaking hypotheses were rejected at first and for a long time until they were finally accepted as self-evident. So Sagan's famous phrase, which he borrowed from Hume on the nature of miracles, is meant to barricade the subject from serious study. And as the scientific popularizer that Sagan was, he was merely doing his job, the job of gatekeeper, the position that Neil deGrasse Tyson holds now. Hence the UFO taboo. This is Wenton Duvall again. Aliens represent an intelligent, self-conscious viewpoint that is not human. And as such, they will forever remain outside of the human power structures. And as such, they threaten the anthropocentric sovereignty that underwrites science's causal powers. And this is why, according to Wenton Duvall, the most monumental subject in history is off limits. So while scientists are currently barred from the study of UFOs in an official capacity, nothing should stop them from doing so privately. We need the Soul Foundation. We need the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. We need scientists. We need the microbiologists, the nanotechnologists, the quantum physicists, the philosophers, the consciousness researchers. We need our best minds looking at this subject to bridge the gap. We need the scientific discourse. We need the questions. We need the challenges that academia can and should provide. Till then, you've got crazy people like me, cranks and weirdos, in the words of Stephen Hawking, keeping the flame on. Dr. Gary Nolan says that critics of the phenomenon distill a constituency or a mode of thought that's valuable because it forces us to create a counter. We can begin that argument by asking the basic question: by our current understanding of reality, is alien visitation to our planet within the realm of the possible? And if so, how might alien visitation be possible? First principles tell us the observable universe is at least 13.8 billion years old, containing as many as 2 trillion galaxies, and overall, more stars than all the grains of sand on planet Earth. NASA says that every 5th of those stars has a planet somewhat like Earth. Not necessarily hospitable to life, but you get the picture. And I'm not saying aliens are from other planets we just don't know, but given that there are as many as 40 billion Earth-sized rocky planets out there, it's a reasonable guess. There are 2 billion of these Earth-sized planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone, but there is no moat around the Milky Way. Interstellar travel means intergalactic travel. Why do I say that? Because from light's point of view, which the science philosopher Peter Russell says is the only way to look at light, there is no time and there is no distance between the points of emission and the point of absorption. Faster than light travel is an oxymoron because the speed of light is now. Any faster than that gets into backward time scales, and who wants to deal with that? This is general relativity. Time stops at the speed of light. It's only from a human perspective that a photon takes 100,000 years to cross the Milky Way. And the only thing preventing us from traveling at the speed of now is a little thing called gravity and mass. Once we learn to unhook mass from gravity, the universe will be our oyster. What will we find? As I said earlier, aliens have begun an irreversible process of inserting themselves in the evolutionary timelines of humanity. So it's important to ask, what are they? Who are they? Why are they here? Why are they so elusive? Could aliens help us to learn to survive what Carl Sagan called our technological adolescence and become a sustainable civilization? Are they here to help us, hurt us, or something else? Why do aliens want us to know that they're here? So we've got new clues to some of these fundamental questions about aliens. And I think it's time we start exploring the hard problem of alien visitation. June 23rd, 1976, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Paulo Cino was walking home from night school late one evening, and he was literally abducted right off the street. Paulo would be missing for 20 hours. His parents were frantic, called the police, neighbors were searching for him. The next morning, his girlfriend found his books and his papers laying in the street and took him over to his parents' house. Police were searching for Paulo night and day. Night fell. And then his father opened the back door to get some air. And there he was, shaky, semi-conscious. Paulo would never be the same again, and he'd never forget what happened. According to Paulo Cino, all during the day of the 23rd, he had heard on and off a mysterious whistling sound. So he left his class at 10:30 at night, walked his girlfriend home, and then he noticed up in the sky a light moving westward. He felt a shudder, and he found himself paralyzed. The light began to descend, stopped about 20, 25 feet away, and there emerged a, quote, very short being with a big head, large eyes and pointed ears, a small mouth, and an upturned nose like a pig's. He wore a tight one-piece suit of blue-gray color with an emblem on its chest. And Paulo found himself rising up through the air, this humanoid. And they approached a huge cigar-shaped craft, reddish in hue, about 650 feet long. Paulo had an attack of vertigo as he passed into the craft, where he found himself surrounded by 3 other little alien beings. They took him into a large room where there were 6 more of these little humanoids. So like the first room, it was empty, it was devoid of furniture, it was very bright, but there's no visible light source, often recorded. Paulo received a telepathic message that he would not be harmed, and he was able to ask, what do you guys come to do here on Earth? And they replied, we're studying how life arose on the planets and in the universe. They showed Paulo a 3D image of the Russians and the Americans docking in space. Paulo asked what they thought of human technology. They said, if all countries on the planet join their efforts in common, the results would have a much greater scope. Paulo asked if they ever used robots or robot technology. The aliens replied no, but each of them was specifically prepared to do the tasks that they were doing now. Some of the aliens looked a little more delicate, so he was told that these were female. He asked about reproduction. They told him on their planet there was no sex, but children were produced in a lab and prepared for different functions in their society. Paulo asked, well, why don't you aliens come descend en masse on planet Earth? They replied, as long as the people of Earth remain divided, such an action would only provoke war. They said there are millions of other planets with life besides Earth. They were currently visiting and currently researching. They showed him what looked like a star map, and Paulo said, I want to go home. So they took him into another room. They laid him on a table. The doctor alien performed what he thought was an examination. And then Paulo feels a strong crushing pressure enveloping his body, and he finds himself outside the craft again with another humanoid being. He saw flashing lights, and he passes out. Next thing he remembers, waking up by the garden door of his family. He was taken to a local hospital. The police officer that carried him to the ambulance later said he felt a strong irritation on his body, especially the arms. Ballpoint pens found in the boy's pockets were found to be strongly radioactive. And that's the story of Paulo. These humanoid 5-fingered aliens told him that they were studying how life arose in the universe, that millions of other planets held such life, that they were specifically prepared in a lab to perform specific functions in their society, and then until the people of Earth joined together, their presence here would only provoke war. We've got similar stories from thousands of other humans who had contact with many different other types of aliens. In 2013, Jacques Vallée, I think in his book Dimensions, estimated that there was something like 3 million UFO landing cases over just a 20-year period on Earth, on planet. So believe it or not, like it or don't, aliens have inserted themselves into the evolutionary timelines of human history. They've done it quietly, surreptitiously, but also undeniably. Aliens are visiting, they're working, they're monitoring, perhaps even managing human civilization. They may be here for other reasons as well. Some of them may have been here all along. Evolutionary scientists will tell you that should the clock be rewound and played out again on planet Earth. Nothing like the humanoid form should ever rise again, and certainly not on any alien planets. This is used to definitively debunk all encounters with humanoid aliens, right? Nothing in our understanding of evolution suggests that anything like a humanoid alien should remotely be true. If there is, yes, convergent evolution, but nobody's been willing to take it that far. Well, one idea seems to have gained traction in recent years is the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. So according to philosopher and computer scientist Bernardo Castro, UFO landings are so common they must indicate that NHI is not extraterrestrial. They've been here all along. He writes, quote, UAP's behavior is precisely what one would expect if they were from here and simply going about their business. Kastrup says there's a couple of ways to test this hypothesis. One prediction, Kastrup writes, is this, quote, the materials, say the metals, used in a UAP craft should have isotopic ratios compatible with an earthly origin, as opposed to one outside of the solar system. If the powers that be are in possession of such a craft, this shouldn't be a difficult test to perform. This makes sense. Aliens from outside our solar system should arrive in craft that were built outside our solar system. But if you were an alien interested in studying intelligent beings in a stealthy manner, what's a good way to hide the alien origin of your spacecraft? April 2023. An anonymous user on 4chan posted that he or she worked as an analyst for a top secret UFO program and has, quote, intimate knowledge of what the US government currently knows about UFOs minus the last 2 years. This is 23. Poster went on to say, 1, modern UFOs are primarily unmanned drones. They wrote that the number of piloted craft has actually decreased over the years. 2, UFOs are built to spec each time they are deployed. 3, UFOs are created on Earth by an underwater mobile construction facility. 4, the military believes this facility has been in operation on Earth for at least 100 years. So here's an eyewitness account of the fabrication of a small, seamless UFO right before her eyes. This is from hybridsrising.com. Quote, I watched a single metallic box print a two-beam saucer craft. The device was rectangle shaped. It was about 50 centimeters long, 30 centimeters wide, and 30 centimeters tall. There was a channel about 5 by 18 centimeters that ran the length of the underside. In an open grassy area, nearby trees, the device was placed on the ground, channel side down. It then began extruding metal from the channel in a right to left to right motion. I was told the device extracted all the components it needed from the soil to produce this alloy. The components it uses are minerals at the molecular level. It was very fast, and the primary base outline was completed in about 20 minutes. There was no visible power source, cables, or other connections. The device was totally silent in its operation. I was impressed, but not surprised by their level of technology. So visiting aliens could hide evidence of their technology by simply constructing all their tools or devices, their machines, from raw materials found within the target planet. This would also solve the problem of shipping huge fleets of scout craft to an alien planet. As one general put it, that's a hell of a supply. But if you send just one factory ship, what is commonly called a self-replicating von Neumann machine, capable of using local materials, you're in business. Potentially, alien artifacts have no exotic isotopic ratios because the alien machines are being built right here on Earth using earthly materials. But it might go further. In his essay in the debrief, Kastrup states the second test for the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, as he calls it. Quote, it stands to reason that organisms evolved on another planet with different environmental conditions and chemical composition are very unlikely to have the exact same biochemistry we do, even under the assumption of convergent evolution at the level of the phenotype, body form. Therefore, if the biologics in the freezers of the powers that be have the same biochemistry that we do, I believe it is safe to assume they are terrestrial. Well, one thing. You may have heard of the EBO scientist from Reddit, who posted in June of 2023 from a throwaway account. Quote, from the late 2000s to the mid-2010s, I worked as a molecular biologist for a national security contractor in a program to study exobiospheric organisms, also known as EBOs. The aim of the program was to elucidate the genome and the proteome basis of these organisms. The poster states that the US government has been studying these organisms for decades, but it wasn't until the late 1990s that breakthroughs in genetic sequencing reinvigorated the field. The Human Genome Project was completed in April 2003. They sequenced all 20,000 or so human genes to make them accessible for biological study. The EBO scientist said that he worked in a lab with about 20 other researchers, and he had access to 4 alien body parts or alien bodies. The first thing that surprised the scientists was that the genetic makeup of the EBOs was similar to that of creatures on Earth, that they used the same molecular hardware. The EBOs had a simplified genome of 16 circular chromosomes consisting of the same genetic code found on Earth. He writes, what's disturbing is that some genes correspond directly, nucleotide by nucleotide, with known human genes, or even some animal genes. He writes, there are also many genes which are not found in our biosphere, whose role has not yet been identified. Finding the purpose of these novel genes is one of the aims of the program. The alien genome is not only smaller than that of humans, we have 46 chromosomes, they have 16, but composed in such a way, he says, that suggests, quote, purposeful genetic engineering. Quote, given the high probability of artificiality of their genome and the apparent ease of modifying it with biomolecular tools, there could be polymorphism between individuals, depending on their role and function. In other words, an individual could be genetically designed to have characteristics that give it an advantage in performing a given task, like soldier ants and worker ants in an anthill. And quote. Indeed, the EBO scientist describes what is very much like a typical alien gray. He said that the gray color was actually a biofilm that protected their skin. The EBO scientist said that under the gray biofilm, the actual skin was kind of white. These gray had no anus, no urethra, no alimentary canal. They excrete waste, he says, through countless small pores on their skin, giving off an odor like ammonia and burnt hair. Russian researchers should prick up their ears. So it's probably a good thing these creatures don't have an olfactory bulb. Given the absence of teeth, the narrowness of the esophagus, the absence of a true stomach, the absence of defecation, he strongly believes that the EBO can only consume food in liquid form, probably a nutrient-rich, sugary broth made from ground-up human fetuses. I'm kidding. He did not say it. Another possibility is that the gray alien can absorb nutrients through the skin. This is me talking. Because there's an account from Dr. David Jacobs' book, Walking Among Us. An abductee found herself in a round room surrounded with 6 or 8 see-through coffin-like structures standing on end. The coffins were full of liquid, and each one contained a gray alien. And she watched as the liquid drained from the coffins and the grays stepped out. She said they went right through the glass. They stepped out. Her handler found her, and she was able to ask, what were you doing? And the answer was eating and sleeping. Hagfish are capable of directly absorbing organic nutrients through their skin using specially adapted transport channels and leveraging sodium ion gradients. With hagfish, their skin functions as a highly selective permeable membrane. Hagfish feed by burrowing through the decaying corpses of large animals on the ocean floor. It sounds delicious. The scientist says that the EBO are, quote, artificial, ephemeral, and disposable. They are unable to live independently without technological support. They are alive only to accomplish their task. So if this is a LARP, it's a really, really good one. Gary Nolan was impressed enough to suggest that researchers should take a close look at this post and see if they can poke some holes in it. So we don't know which gray type aliens the EBO scientist was working on. There are several known types of gray. But if these bodies were in freezers for decades, as he said, they might predate the abduction phenomenon itself. Another account, 2021, John Ramirez, a former CIA officer, he stated that human DNA may have been found in the genome of alien bodies recovered from crash disks, going as far back as Roswell. So, we have Paulo Cino telling us that his aliens make babies in a lab designed for specific purposes. We have a 4chan military analyst claiming that UFOs are built to spec each time they are deployed. We have an abductee claiming that they extract minerals at the molecular level from the ground. And the EBO scientist claiming that he was looking at custom-built bespoke organisms created using our own genetic code to perform specific tasks here on Earth. So where are we going with this? For humans, interstellar travel seems impossible because even at light speed, we're looking at thousands of years, right? Too long for a human being to travel. Earlier, I said that light, from light's point of view, is instantaneous, which is true, but only from for the speed of light travel. Light is instantaneous, but only for the guy traveling at the speed of light. Back home, thousands of years have gone by. We know this. In other words, unless they can go back in time, a crew of spacefaring aliens are not coming home again. But if aliens sent self-replicating von Neumann machines with automated genetic laboratories, they could extract a sample from the target planet and create an army of biosynthetic organisms to do their business on the planet of their choosing. Some of these organisms could even be indistinguishable from human beings or anything else that they might create. It's certainly an interesting solution to the problem of space travel, and it may explain why at least some of these aliens are human. Now, to be useful, it would be nice to send information back to your home planet. And I talk a lot in my book about telepathy, remote viewing, David Bohm's implicate order, the holographic universe, Dean Radin, Cleve Baxter, Stuart Hameroff, and Roger Penrose's microtubules, but I'm not going to get into that here. Suffice to say that we have very good reasons to believe that consciousness may exist within or may even be a part of that timeless, spaceless zone where light lives, where all information exists in a, quote, superposition ensemble, as Courtney Brown from the Farsight Institute puts it. All points in space and time are entangled. Information may be accessible from anywhere and any when using consciousness-assisted technology. Some alien species may be able to unhook matter from mass and instantaneously ship equipment into the far future and set up shop and send back information to their home planet in real time. Some of them may even be us in the future. Aaron Schultz, he's a freelance comic book artist in his 30s, and he's recently come forward with an account of multiple abductions by non-human creatures when he was 8 to 10 years old. He has 4 clear front to back memories, and he has not undergone any hypnosis or regression. Aaron grew up in Chesterfield, Missouri, a medium-sized city about 30 minutes outside of St. Louis, with his mom, his dad, and his little brother. Aaron's encounters began in 1996. They happened in an unusual fashion that differs slightly from the average alien abduction account. He remembers lying in his bed. He saw some green lights outside of his bedroom window. Then he heard footsteps group of footsteps outside of his bedroom door. He was terrified because he could tell that these footsteps were not his parents or his little brother. The artwork here is by Aaron Schultz. His door opened and 5 or 6 small beings filed into the room. They were about the same size as 8-year-old Aaron, maybe a little taller. He said they had large heads, they were hairless, they were skinny with long arms, dark gray seamless jumpsuit sort of things, no insignia. Aaron says they looked like the typical gray alien, but there was a kind of a gray greenish tint to their skin. They had 3 fingers with a 4th that acted as an opposable thumb. They didn't speak, but Aaron got a, quote, very strong knowing that they wanted him to come with them. So he would undergo a typical alien exam on the ship, and then the beings would lead him out of the ship, into the backyard, through the house, back into his bedroom. He said they used the back door, the sliding glass back door of his house. And he wasn't transported through walls like the typical alien abduction. So he gets very tired, he falls asleep. He's got 3 experiences just like this. But I want to focus on Aaron's 4th remembered encounter because he was able to ask some questions and he received some answers. Aaron says he came forward because the information that he was giving might add something to the conversation. So thank you, Aaron. So this time he remembers being on the craft and an opening appearing in the wall of the craft, revealing a curved hallway that led to a different room that he'd never been in before. He said the floor was the same white spongy material as the rest of the craft, but the walls were kind of a lime green here, and the alien sat him down at a table. The table looked like it was growing out of the floor. On the table, there was a white cube about the size of a lunchbox, and one alien sat down across from him, and the boy managed to ask, "Are you guys aliens?" Aaron Schultz says the being looked at him and blinked. He remembers that because he'd never seen them blink before. So with a traditional gray alien, this is indeed very rare. The being responded, "I'm sure it seems that way to you." It said, "We are from your future. You Earth humans are our ancient ancestors." He said, "Well, what are you guys doing? Why are you visiting?" The being said, "Well, many of us came for different reasons." He said, "My colleagues and I are here to study human biology at a point in time before you began integrating technology into your bodies." And then he said, "Others on the craft are here to study human systems of governance. Some are here to study other creatures that live on Earth with you." The being said, "At our point in time, we live on a planet very far from the Earth because the beings who live there are not friendly towards us." Aaron says the being was referring to the far future Earth, as in the beings who live on this future Earth are not friendly towards us, so we live on a different planet. Aaron was a very inquisitive kid. He was always asking questions about everything, and he was excited that somebody was answering his questions and not telling him to go read a book somewhere. So he asked, "Are there any others visiting us?" The being said, "Yeah, there are many beings from many worlds coming to visit. Some are local to your time, others are not. We don't speak to most of them, but we do hear rumors that there were deals made with your leaders. Technological gifts may have been given in exchange for free reign to experiment on the humans that they serve," end quote. Not the first time we've heard that. And then so that answer went over Aaron's head a little bit. So the next question he asked was, "Do you guys like pizza?" So we have an account of future humans living on a different planet, traveling back in time to their home planet to study earlier versions of themselves before we started integrating technology in our bodies. Now, this suggests that these aliens are a form of, or a cybernetic version of humanity who have integrated technology into their bodies. But Aaron was asked, oh, I forgot to mention, he was, He was then asked to move the white cube on the table using just his mind. And Aaron said he tried over and over, he couldn't do it. And then the aliens were done with him, dropped him off, and he never saw them again. So if he's being asked to move the cube with his mind, and they're studying humans before we integrated any technology into our bodies, this could imply that things like telekinesis, remote viewing, telepathy are somehow inherent or a naturally occurring phenomenon, since they're studying this before we incorporated any such technology. So if there's truth to Aaron's account, it suggests that there are many different races, presumably from many different planets, perhaps many different times, and yet many of them, but certainly not all of them, but many of them strongly resemble each other. This far future beings, they resemble, some of them, gray aliens. Their technology is rather similar, but they're not the same. Their protocols are not the same. Their mission is not the same. And if they can go back in time, presumably other aliens could do the same. And that means aliens could go home again. Kurt Gödel, you say his name, Gödel, the brilliant mathematician responsible for the incompleteness theorem that challenged the very essence of math and logic. He thought that if the universe is curved, then backwards time travel could be possible, especially with a nuclear-powered DeLorean, another conversation. So we've got telekinesis, time travel, and some form of integrated technology that may take advantage of a natural feature of the universe, some form of extended mind, as Dean Radin calls it. Deeply entwined with alien contact is what the Canadian radio engineer and ufologist Wilbur B. Smith calls the mental phenomenon. Telepathy is not language like mental radio. One abductee described it as thought packets that arrived in her consciousness, which she then had to unpack into her native tongue. When Elon Musk says that Neuralink one day will let us speak without using language, this is what he's talking about. If real information can be extracted from the light zone, communication would not be symbolic. Aliens would have access to not only real thoughts, but radical events that happen in the universe. Not a written report, not somebody's version of reality. We would have access to reality itself, the events themselves. The truth is, telepathy involves major systemic changes to any society that implements it, whether based on AI and machine learning or by taking advantage of superposition ensembles. Telepathy and highly radical remote viewing would mean one thing. It would mean the end of a society based on privacy. One major difference is aliens don't lie. With the superposition ensemble, we see that aliens don't lie because they can't. Instead of a set of rules or personal principles, the non-local nature of reality itself dictates their actions. What could be truer than that? If something like a quantum hologram exists, it virtually assures that as a society is going to advance, it must become more attuned with the truth of reality, not less so. Groups or civilizations who have access to this superposition ensemble must be based in reality, not somebody's version of reality. This is very different from human society, which exists on a spectrum of truth versus untruth. On one end of the spectrum, we have murder, embezzlement, piracy, date rape, wife swapping, all the things we'd rather no one know about. Can the machinery of society really function without the lubricant of untruth, without the grease of graft? It seems antithetical, heretical, almost. But the question brings up an interesting anecdote. Charles James Hall was a weather observer in the U.S. Air Force in the 60s. He has related that the tall white aliens that he encountered at Nellis Air Force Base in the mid-1960s they had a really hard time understanding human behavior. And Hall's account with the tall whites is one of the most credible that we have on record, in my opinion. As an aside, Hall said that the tall whites carried a little box about the size of a pager on their belt, and that this was the source of their telepathic abilities. According to Hall, the tall whites have been using the Nevada desert as an interstellar stopover to undisclosed locations long before James Madison was president. With the arrival of the Air Force, the tall whites had formed an agreement with the local fauna to continue using the Nevada desert as a rest area, whose aridity and heat were quite to their liking. The tall whites had a deal with Nellis, which is adjacent to Area 51, where they were permitted to operate a small base station, which our military had dug into the foot slopes of Sheep Mountain just for this purpose. So in exchange, the tall whites gave the Air Force a little gift. Hall said it looked like this. Hall said it operated, this tic-tac shaped object, with using miles and miles of something like tightly wound fiber optic cable. The aliens had warned the generals at Nellis in advance that any deals or promises made with the tall whites had to be carried out to the letter, with no exceptions. Their society made no allowances for any kind of hedging, fudging, spinning, reneging. And Charles himself learned this the hard way. Some tall whites were brought down to his weather station one day to observe him as part of their own acclimation program, where newbie tall whites were gradually exposed to the local indigenes. So tall whites get their name because they're about 6 to 7 feet tall for the younger ones and up to 9 feet for the older ones, who experience a second growth later in their life. And compared to humans, they are frail, they're skinny, they're pale, perhaps because they live 800-900 years. The tall whites take an inordinate amount of time to heal from things like cuts or broken bones. Consequently, they are very skittish around humans, rather like we would be if we were dropped in the middle of a jungle to observe apes in their natural habitat. So apparently a few of Paul's predecessors had lost their lives by making a wrong move at the wrong time. You don't want to startle the tall whites' children, according to Hall. So wisely, Charles had made a habit of broadcasting everything that he did or intended to do while the tall whites were around, which made everybody feel safer. So on this particular day, Charles had announced to one of the tall whites that he was going to retrieve his clipboard from the weather shack and then go to his truck. However, when Charles came out of the shack, he didn't have a clipboard. Okay, so a tall white chaperone, Charles called him teacher, stopped him and asked him, "Where's the clipboard? Where you said you were going to get the clipboard? Where is it?" And Charles told him, "I forgot." And he moved to grab it, but the tall white stopped him. He said, "Charles, you just said you're going to do one thing, and yet you've done another. Why? Is this how all humans behave? Why couldn't humans do what they say what they mean? How could you live in a society like that?" Charles Hall relates that he had to virtually beg for his life out there in the desert, trying to explain to an alien why he'd forgotten his clipboard and how this fudge factor was just an accepted part of human life. Charles wasn't even lying, he just forgot. And the tall white couldn't wrap his mind around it. I think the story illustrates just how different our societies. For humans, fudging, lying, cheating, we don't even think about it. It doesn't mean we're inherently evil. Rather, our self-interest tends to get in the way of our social interest, and lying helps even the playing field. Essentially, we want what we want. We want to look good dead men. Men generally lie to make themselves look better. Women generally lie to make the other person feel better. But a telepathic society would operate on an entirely different level of awareness and reality. We can hardly imagine, but we're getting it. AI can now recreate what you see from a brain scan in real time. It's getting better and better every day at that. Apple just patented a pair of earbuds that uses AI to translate and read brainwaves. Duke University, they've been doing this for a while now. They're implanting brain chips in groups of monkeys and then teaching them to solve problems using group mind that a single monkey couldn't solve on his own. Elon Musk, his brain chip is now in human trials. So as our work and our lives become dependent upon this so-called cybernetic technology, will we become like the gray alien who cannot survive without technological support? If I buy into this nanotech and the brain chips and the AI brainwave ear pods that give these corporations access to my mind, and they don't like what I'm thinking, they don't like what I'm saying, will they just turn me off or kick me out of the hive? So while telepathy seems to work for alien societies, for us right now, it's a safe bet that this technology will just lead to greater and greater forms of mind control. Instead of the will of the people, we'll be yoked to an extremely small cabal of controllers who run the show. And the question becomes, to what end will these controllers bend our will? Will it be for good, or will it be for evil? Aliens can't lie to each other, but this doesn't mean they don't lie to us. Not by a long shot. The alien agenda on Earth operates by stealth and by secrecy, often at night, under the cloak of invisibility. I think we're dealing with the intersection of at least three types of societies. We can call ours a divided society. The sense of self is limited to the individual private units of consciousness, right? We're born alone, we die alone, we're essentially a divided society. Thoughts and ideas can't be shared with any degree of accuracy or detail except through physical, symbolic, translative means. This private sense of self engenders isolation and endless forms of deception. It also produces great art, music, drama. We're constantly searching for ways to reach out, to be seen, to be understood. Telepathic aliens, they can be grouped into two categories: collective and united. We might employ two types of telepathy. David Jacobs calls them selective and immersive. In a collective society, telepathy is selective. The individual can choose what to share with the collective. The members may be organized into a kind of a caste system with descending levels of self-awareness. Lower members may include biosynthetic organisms or drones or avatars. Unified telepathic beings would be fully integrated into a collective whole, a universal consciousness, perhaps with no extant sense of individuality. A Borg, at least that's the way humans understand it. And most likely this kind of unity would be achieved through a self-directed evolution that utilizes high technology and large timescales. But whether selective or immersive, telepathy isn't just about accessing other brains. Remote viewing, psi phenomena, these suggest that aliens can access real events that happen anywhere in the universe at any time. This means that visiting aliens would know us far better than we would know ourselves. And that is a good point to stop.
Wow. That's just part one. That's just part one. That's
How long was
insane.
that?
I'm maybe about an hour, almost on the dot. I'm not sure, but that was that's amazing that you knew the exact time of how long that would take. I'm always blown away by somebody who brings a different perspective to things, and I like how you mentioned how the gray entity mentioned to that kid that there was sort of like a divide on Earth between them and that we don't like them, so they had to go somewhere else. And that begs the question, because we're talking about extraterrestrial from the future, or that they're living here, we discover them, and now we're pissed off and they have to go live somewhere else. Or is it that there was a fork in the road at some point in the
Right.
human genome where certain people, because we see it in Hollywood and everywhere else, but people getting cosmetic surgery to try to enhance themselves. I can only assume it'll be the same thing with technology. So do you have an
Yeah.
idea as to what would branch us out so differently?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And, it's sort of continuing on for this concept of a divided society, right? And if, whether through technology, well, probably through technology, but whether that's assisting a kind of a natural phenomena that we're accessing, that is consciousness, are there still divisions, So assuming that some sort of technologically assisted consciousness will allow us to share a kind of a group mind, at least temporarily, this just opens up huge vistas of interpersonal communication, right? I mean,
Right.
It really changes the idea of marriage, or friendship or social media, But even then, but by the way, this is just an assumption. Like, what was there a division that drove these two aspects of human of these future humans apart, or was it overcrowding? Was it just got too much here, and we need, or was it corporate expansion? The
Good point.
right, the what's it called,
The expanse. See what I did there?
right, is it
Yeah.
so right, why would they need another planet? It's kind of interesting, like kind of tells you something about maybe hints at a little bit of galactic politics, just the fact that other civilizations would allow another planet. Where is this other planet? Is it like halfway across the galaxy? Is it all? Is the real estate any good? Do they have a nice sun? I don't know.
Maybe they have timeshares.
I wanted to say thank you for that. So much food for thought. And one of the first things I was thinking about back in the 70s, late 70s at the Rocky Mountain Ranch from the APRA report, it was claimed that there were two types and they were in conflict with one another. One were these like 2B AI type that Paul Giamatti actually called the 2B guys. And then the other types were these Nordic type, these tall, blonde, blue-eyed. And it made me think, and I've thought about this for years now, that perhaps they were in conflict for the soul. I mean, the nature of reality, our souls, where we're headed. And you're right. I mean, time is not linear. It's all out there at once. But do you think that's what this about? And what do you think of like CRISPR technology and making babies in labs and making perfect humans? And do you think that's perhaps what some of this battle is for holding on to just humanity and not merging with AI? And unfortunately, I tend to believe cat's out of the bag. It's too late now. We're headed down a particular road. And is there any way to come back from it? I know that's a couple questions, but
yeah, no, there's so much coming down the pike that our primitive brains, the solutions that we are leaning towards as a society, in my opinion, seem to be totalitarian solutions to these problems. We're feeling the hammer come down. We're feeling, censorship. I mean, we really need cooler heads to prevail in the preservation of human freedoms, because whatever the decisions are that we're going to have to make about what the future is going to look like biologically, consciously, we need to continue to underwrite human freedom as the ground floor of these decisions, right? Because once we start chipping away at that, then we're looking at a totalitarian nightmare civilization with slaves and drones, and they'll change the names, but it'll be it won't be fun for a lot of the folks who live here. Now, Ray Kurzweil says the democratization of technology, it will probably, he doesn't believe that we're going to bifurcate into a kind of a technological have and have nots, that just like the cell phone now, everyone has one because the price has gone down and now people can afford them, whereas before they were fancy toys for people who had money. So too will genetic engineering and these other technologies. And I believe that that's true to an extent, but it's, for me, my question is, who controls these technologies? That small group of people who control the technology are going, and believe me, they like it that way. I mean, that's where we're headed right now. So again, like, having these conversations, that's why I believe it's so important, that it's not just kind of a hobby, something that we do in our free time. Although, we do it in our free time, but the importance of the subject, I think, can't be underestimated.
Agreed.
Yeah, listening to your presentation, which I thoroughly enjoyed, made me think so many times about how, like, I'm fairly new to the topic. And when I came in, it just seemed to me like I have no idea where to draw the boundaries around these questions and other disciplines. It's like you start asking questions about these phenomena, and immediately all these lines of connection just sprout out and touch on genetic engineering and the sort of accelerating rate of technological change, and like world economics and nuclear weapons, and just, it's like it just never ends. There's no boundaries at all. And that seems like the major challenge in talking about the phenomenon the way that you want to, is you want to explode all those connections, not explode as in like destroy them, but like you want to investigate them. You want to see how all the parts fit together. And we haven't like turned UAP studies into a real discipline yet, where there's like a way of systematically kind of thinking about.
Hey, Michael, we're working on it. We're working on it.
Yeah, we are. I mean, it's the podcast, not just the podcast, but like the subject hasn't become a discipline like genetics or history or whatever. So it's super challenging, and I am genuinely impressed by like how broadly you've read and pulled all these different threads. I mean, I haven't heard anybody reference Burson and forever. So I'm really excited to talk to you about him at some point.
I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
I did. I love it.
You're right. Narrowing the field. I mean, right now, I guess one of the intents of trying to sort of broaden the, what is to just impress upon people what the natural outcomes or consequences are of taking seriously the idea of alien visitation happening now, and how vast the scope is of the cusp of that we're on right now. The scope of the changes that are coming our way is really too much to wrap our minds around. But focusing on the important elements, the elements that are going to have an effect on all of us, but if you're newer to the subject, narrowing the scope is a good idea.
I was going to say, that's when I don't know if you know of Julia Mossbridge's work. She's a doctor and she talks about precog. And one thing I love about her work is that she is like, it's looking like everybody has the ability to nurture our superpowers and to precog into the future, but how do we use this to help humanity? And do you feel, Thomas, that, we are going to awaken and relearn, because I think we had it in ancient times, our innate abilities to change our realities, to help humanity? And is this something that perhaps is coming for us in the future, to be able to use our superpowers more? Do you think that's part of all of what's happening right now as well?
Absolutely. I was reading about this the other day, and I don't remember the source, but we've become really, really good at manipulating digital information, right? This digital world that we live in, we're broadening the scope and able to do so many different things with all the AI stuff that's coming online, and that will this is just the beginning. What we're able to do with digital information, all the broad scope of that, in my opinion, aliens have learned to manipulate reality using it as digital information. In other words, that translation, where we can manipulate digital information. Imagine being able to take an object and digitally manipulate every quark in an atom inside of something, and then be able to take it apart and put it back together in any shape you like, or merge things together. And so the powers of creation do run that deep. You know, if we had enough information, we could take apart a physical reality and put it back together again. And that may have something to do with how, light speed travel may be possible. Maybe possible to using a massive AI computer, deconstruct every atom and connection in an object, turn it into digital information, send it at the speed of light, because information is massless, light carries information, and then reconstruct it at any place and any time, perhaps any time in the universe. So what we're doing, it may be just the very beginnings of what aliens are able to do, and that changes everything. And morality, are the ground space of why we're doing the things we're doing becomes paramount, becomes really important.
Maybe that's the big secret that's being kept from the Templars.
But you know what's weird too is that we don't only have like these levels of complexity, because you're thinking, okay, well, we're dealing with intelligence that are so far above us, but what's above them and what's above them? You know what I mean? Like, how is this like a Russian doll of consciousness that must, get bigger and bigger as we go? But what's even weird, because you were mentioning about AI, and we start integrating ourselves with AI. Soon we'll willingly plug ourselves into the matrix, and that becomes another realm. That becomes another reality for us, where we're walking around, and because we're plugged in, there's ads everywhere you go that you just see digitally in your mind. They're not actually there, but they're catered to you and what you like. So if you're an artist, they show you paintbrushes. If you're into horses, they show you cowboy supplies. Yeah. But it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys seen the movie Valerian, but there's a part where they put on these glasses and they're in another world shopping with these glasses on. And I thought, well, that's maybe is what, the Greys are. They're the avatar of these other entities that are able to, at a distance, control these things and make them look as close to us, where it doesn't freak us out as much, because maybe the way they look is actually quite jarring. But it does beg a lot of questions, because I think, even at Contact, there was a lot of talk about AI, the struggles we have. Is it going to be ethical? Even you were mentioning about, the Thomas, about the human nature. And we were talking, guys, the other day about, they're coming out with AI now where you could design your own perfect girl. And instead of being dating that girl, you put on a suit with the visors and everything, and you feel as if she's actually there. You're interacting, and then that means no more relationships with actual people. And that's going to cause decrease in population. People are going to become addicted to it. You just need to try it once. It'll be like black tar heroin, just once, and you're addicted to it, right? So I just thought I want to know about your thoughts on that, like the pros and cons of this.
The social systems that we exist within and that have created, capitalism, free markets have created this incredible world that we're living in now, and has allowed, in a lot of ways, science and technology to give us computers. I mean, look, go back to 1973. The world pretty much exactly the same, except we don't have cell phones and the internet. Not a whole lot has changed. There's a lot that we could improve on, and haven't. So I think there's a certain stagnation that's also inherent to free market systems. Why? Because the people who've made all the money, say building the railroads, don't really want to, go to flying cars. They want to stick with right? We want to stick with gasoline
Right.
for as long as humanly possible. And this retards our evolution, technical evolution. But so we're envisioning sort of like the end game of this, like you said, virtual reality where everything's an ad. That's the end game of our system that we're living in now. But that system cannot survive the technological innovation that we are approaching. The systems themselves will have to change. And right now, that we're seeing this totalitarian rise in the West because of that, because people are trying to control the future. But with consciousness, remote viewing has a pretty good hit rate, and there's obviously a real phenomenon there, but it's not good enough to be able to spy on the Russians 100% of the time, or use it as a genuine tool. But with technology, I think we're going to be able to make 100% hit rate out of things like telepathy and remote viewing. But those abilities will change the fabric of the society that we live in. They have to, just simply because we won't be a divided society anymore. Our consciousnesses will begin to merge. I won't be able to lie about where I was last night.
Right, because everybody knows everything you've done. Right.
Everyone has access.
I don't know if that's a good thing. I mean, I don't know.
Not if you want to call into work sick,
Right.
I'm not feeling well today. Like, hell, you're not. Yeah.
That sounds awful, doesn't it? I want to lie.
I think your conception of good and bad will change. Like your whole idea of what's good or bad
That's right.
will be altered by these sort of technological shifting frameworks. I mean, I think about this pretty often. Like what would society be like if all pain and suffering were communal? Like if you had heartache and everybody around you had to feel it also, or if you felt hunger and everybody else had to feel it. I mean, lots of social problems would instantly evaporate. You couldn't have starving people because
start working on feeding some people.
Yeah. And that might be the sort of solution that we have to engineer. I mean, that might be why we can have unfair societies, is because we don't have these sort of empathic telepathy or shared mental states or whatever.
It's exactly right.
Maybe living in the giver then. And I want to ask Thomas, like, is that where we want to head?
What's The Giver?
The Giver is a movie. It sort of like starts out black and white, and everybody's born for a purpose, and they have a particular job or a mission, and you don't feel, basically you're numbed down, no emotion, no this, and you're,
yes,
the
like totalitarian sort of techno totalitarian society. Is that the deal?
Well, and it's under the guise of, social media. We're seeing it now, stay connected, but we know the poisons of social media. Look at Twitter, I wouldn't want to be connected because I know this is just me, my opinion, but I think 80% of the world are idiots, and I just don't want to know what they're thinking at all given times. You know what I mean? That's not something that I want, but I think there's going to be, we're talking about that divide, and we were mentioning how it seems to be the right side brain people that are more into this subject, yourself included. Thomas, you're an actor, performer, anybody who's creative seems to be more consciously aware than people who are left brains. And I'm almost wondering if the divide's going to happen where eventually maybe my kids can move things with their minds or can read somebody else's minds. Like, is it something that goes through why do they follow generation to generation? Is it to achieve that goal? Or do they know that person at the end comes from this line, so they're just securing something? I don't know. But it's so interesting because there's so many theories and philosophies we could get into.
Yeah, it opens up a lot of doors and gets us thinking about what kind of future we want to have,
Yeah.
I think that's really, really important. I recently sort of become obsessed with this idea that even though it's still a fringe topic, we're being impacted by this now, the gifting scenario. Even if scout craft crash from time to time, and if there's some massive AI that's sort of running the program of scout crafts and all that, it makes sense that every now and then there's a glitch, things happen in the world, something crashes, but they could clean that up in a heartbeat if they wanted to. So anything that we have is we're being allowed to have it, and so to what end? And I think one of the ends is to get us thinking. What kind of world? You look at the world you guys are creating here. This isn't going to last, fellas. We might want to start thinking about the universe in a different way. And I think that's exactly what.
Either way, it's fascinating that these entities care enough to tell us and warn us of these things. I mean, they could just not care. Right?
Yeah. And we'll get into that in part 2, because I really want to get into sort of, do they care? And I think that they care about the cosmic ecology that they come from first, maintaining the integrity of the long-term cosmological societies that they've built, that have been around long before human civilizations, that have seen civilizations like us come and go on other planets. They must, at least from our Darwinian point of view right now, be interested in securing their own futures first. So looking at it through that lens is what we'll do in part 2.
Wow. Well, I'm so appreciative that you came in and gave us part 1 of your presentation, considering you're under the weather. We've been talking all week on the texting you, and you're just feeling so bad. I'm so happy that you're on the mends, but you're still not perfect, but you still gave us a heck of a presentation. And I hope that the listeners get a kick out of it as much as we do. We do look forward to part 2. We're going to schedule that, guys, very, very soon to make sure that it's we can launch it fairly close to each other. So for those of you who want to enjoy it, can do it. We have Gary Nolan next week, guys. That is joining us. We're recording that on a Tuesday, but we'll release that the following Monday, and we look forward to that. But you know what? Thank you so much, Thomas, for kicking off this new branch that we're going to, like doing these presentations. Like even we're talking with the gentlemen from and women, of course, from the SCU, and trying to get them to come on and do their presentations. They're so amazing, and so few people see them. There's so much work that goes behind them. Yeah,
I gotta thank you. I think it's really terrific. I'm a fan of the channel. So for me, it's a real thrill to be able.
It's awesome.
That
made my week. Thank you so much for saying that. Awesome, guys. We'll be back with another episode. Stay tuned.